All right. I think we are live. Welcome, everyone, and thanks for joining us at this Vsphere Live. My name is Glenn Simon, Product Marketing Manager for Vsphere. I'm your host for today. This is Vsphere Live. We have with you, or with us, several of our experts on the Vsphere side. I'd like to go a quick round and have each one of you introduce yourselves. Let's start with Michael West.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Michael West. I'm a technical product manager, and I focus on modern applications on vSphere, particularly vSphere with Tanzu.
And Phelim.
Thanks, Glenn. My name is Phelim O'Leary. I'm a senior technical marketing architect, and I focus on pretty much everything vSphere across the board.
And Jim.
I'm Jim Brogan. I'm a senior technical marketing architect. I focus on Bitfusion and AI and machine learning applications.
And Dave.
Hello, everyone. Dave Morera, Senior Technical Marketing Architect for Core vSphere, but I mainly focus on Project Monterey, which is DPUs, and also Project Arctic, which is Vsphere Plus.
And Dave is also based in Tampa. So he is, we're actually thrilled that he's still above water right now. What's the hurricane report over there right now?
Well, we made it through the night. It was definitely a rough night, a lot of wind. It shifted south of us, of Tampa, so hopefully all our friends from Naples and that area are doing okay, but hopefully it looks like everything went well. We made it through, still have power, which is great, so back to work.
Yeah, that's why you're able to join us. So that's great news. Obviously, hurricanes are no laughing matter. We certainly hope everyone is safe there, staying safe, and gets through this okay. All right, so so the topic of our vSphere Live today is about vSphere 8. We announced vSphere 8 at VMware Explore at the end of essentially August 30th. So if you missed the announcement, go ahead and check it out. We actually have a couple of blogs if you're interested. There's a kind of a less technical blog that you can find on the vSphere blog, and then our technical marketing architects here also do a lot of blogs on TechZone, which we'll include in the comment section or the description after this. And you can find they author pretty much all of the vSphere technical blogs, and there's one on vSphere on the overall vSphere 8 announcement on a more technical bent, obviously, and then also they continue to blog on various deep dive topics. So keep an eye on that if you're more technically oriented. But and then also, I just want to let everyone know before we get started with the discussion here that we have a couple of, or not a couple, actually 4 webcasts coming up that we're doing with our friends at VMUG, the VMware User Group, and those are starting on October 5th, and then continuing October 6th, October 13th. And then November 1st. It's a webcast series. The first one gives you kind of an overview, and then the subsequent 3 give deeper dives on various topics, which, again, some of our technical marketing architects will be joining us for those. And I'll remind you at the end as well. So, but for this, what we want to do is kind of have maybe a little less formal conversation about and kind of putting each one of these fellows on the spot about what they're from their perspective, and they're all very seasoned, experienced vSphere folks. What from their perspective is most exciting to them, or what they think that all of you are going to be most excited about for vSphere 8. So let me do the. I'm going to start with Dave, just in case you lose connection. Let's start with Dave. So Dave, from your perspective, what do you see for vSphere 8 being kind of the some of the bigger enhancements you're looking forward to, or that you think customers are gonna want to know about?
Well, for me, and I think for a lot of people, if you went to VMware Explorer in the US, you may have heard a couple of things about DPUs, right? And I'm really, really excited about what we're doing with DPUs with our partners, not only NVIDIA and AMD Pensando, but also Dell, HPE, Lenovo as well. So
what's a DPU?
Was that?
What's a DPU?
I'm getting there.
Okay, sorry.
So DPU is a data processing unit, right? So we also call it SmartNIC, which is pretty much exactly what it is. It's a NIC that it has an accelerator, but it also has a CPU, an ARM CPU. So if you remember a couple years ago, before actually the last in-person VMware, I forgot the name, not Explorer, VMworld,
Oh,
VMworld.
VMworld. How soon we forget?
The last in-person VMworld, they were showing how we could have ESXi on a NIC or a Raspberry Pi, right? So that ARM CPU architecture was able to run ESXi on that, and I thought that was pretty cool. But then I was also thinking, why, where is that going to take us? I'm thinking that was an edge use case, but it turns out where we're doing that to leverage DPUs, and it's not just an edge use case, but also it's an on-prem, right? So we're going to be able to take those DPUs and run ESXi as another layer within an ESXi server, x86, right? And what this is doing, it's allowing us to take those services. So let's think about network services, vSAN services, etc. We're able to take those down to the DPU, and we can free up resources. So all those CPU resources that we were using for networking resources, we're giving those back to the x86 server and giving back to those resources back to the workload. So now we can run workloads, maybe push them a little more, or actually deploy more VMs, run more workloads on those same hosts that we already have without having to add any additional memory or CPU. And we're also, by doing that, we're also adding a security layer, isolation layer, because now we have services running on a separate CPU, and we have our core workload services running on the x86. So now we have that separation between the two, and in essence, giving us that security isolation between the two layers for management and the workload area. So I
Now,
think
this wasn't this we referred to this as Project Monterey before, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So this was Project Monterey, something I've been working on for a while. So like I said, at the general session, I felt like a very proud parent when we announced this, because we finally saw the light. And I think it's just beginning, obviously. There's a lot of use cases that we see coming down the pike. And if you think about when GPUs came out, right, there was only certain use cases for GPUs. I can run my games faster. That's pretty cool. But what is going to happen? And then we can see now how GPUs are taking additional workloads. And I see a lot of benefits coming down in the future for DPUs as well, where we're taking additional workloads, additional use cases, and allowing us to offload that from the servers, and who knows where we're going to end up. So having all this heterogeneous compute within data center is going to be a big plus, a big advancement for our customers in all areas, not only on-prem, but also on the cloud.
And one of the for fun fact is I think it was Gartner that estimated, or IDC, one of those, that around 30% of CPUs today are consumed by networking and security services. So I mean, we're focused right now on the networking side of things, but potentially you could free up like a quarter of your CPU power, right?
Yep. Exactly.
Okay, well that's obviously a huge highlight for this release. So let's move on to Phelim over in Ireland. Phelim,
Yes.
what
Hi,
from your
Glenn.
perspective, what are some of the highlights?
So one thing that I've always been kind of looking at in new releases, because I came from the support background here at VMware, and the first thing that we always had to deal with in support when a new release came out was the life cycle, upgrading vCenter, upgrading our hosts. So I'm glad to see that we're making great improvements in that area, in particular in vSphere Lifecycle Manager. Dave mentioned that we're introducing this whole new DPU, and this DPU has an instance of ESXi. And one of the questions I often get asked is, does that mean now I've got double the amounts of ESXi instances to lifecycle manage? And realistically, the answer is no, because what vSphere Lifecycle Manager will be able to do to support the DPU lifecycle is very simply remediate that ESXi instance in tandem or in parallel with the x86 ESXi instance. So there's no additional remediation effort. It's the same workflow, but you're actually remediating 2 instances in one. So that's pretty cool that we didn't add any additional overhead or workload to the vSphere administrators by introducing the new DPU concept as well. We're also bringing back some improvements to vSphere Lifecycle Manager that we had in the past with the Update Manager way of doing things, but now that we've transitioned to vSphere Lifecycle Manager, we'll now be able to stage updates back down to the hosts. So prepare all the hosts in advance before you hit that remediation button. And this is important because, especially for edge use cases where the link between vCenter and the ESXi host may not be super stable or super high bandwidth, you want to be able to make sure that the actual update payload gets down to the ESXi host so that you can have a successful remediation. So it'll very much improve those edge use cases or those robo use cases that we have.
Okay.
And the other thing that vSphere Lifecycle Manager is helping with is parallel remediation. So, we can scale up to 64, 96 nodes in a cluster, and that could take a long time to remediate if you're doing a full cluster remediation. But with vSphere 8, we can now parallel remediate multiple ESXi hosts at the same time. The administrator has full control over how many they want to remediate at any given one time, but it'll help you significantly speed up the amount of time needed to patch your clusters, get them up onto the latest build, and move forward with all the productivity that you want to do. So they're the main areas in vSphere Lifecycle Manager that are coming down the line in vSphere 8. So I hope people will be able to take advantage of those as well. And that's in the area of patching the hosts. But there is one other thing that is coming with in the same vein, and it's following along the steps of our declarative image for the cluster. We're now taking that model that we use in our cluster image and we're applying it to the cluster configuration. And that's where we're introducing a technical preview at GA of vSphere configuration profiles. And this is going to be our eventual replacement to host profiles, but don't worry, host profiles are still there in vSphere 8. But this is going to get you the same end result, right? The same, the idea is to give a consistent configuration applied to all your hosts in the cluster. But vSphere configuration profiles just does it a little bit differently under the hood. And rather than having to manage separate profiles and make sure they're attached to respective clusters or hosts and things like that, it's all self-contained within the cluster object itself. So you don't have to go to anywhere else in the UI. You go to your cluster object and the configure tab, and there's a section there now for vSphere configuration profiles. So we're hoping it'll make it much easier for people to have consistent cluster configuration. You'll be able to report on any drift, be notified if the configuration of a host has changed for whatever reason. It's always very important in the area of security settings, and the administrator will be able to remediate and bring the host back into compliance. So on the outset, it's not a new concept, consistent cluster configuration. We're just changing up how we do it, bringing it to a more modern approach, and we will eventually then move away from host profiles.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some buzz around configuration profiles. All right, so let's go to Jim. So Jim, in the AI world, of course, AI is. I mean, who doesn't? Who doesn't care about AI, right? I mean, anybody building Skynet or
we all have to. Our overlords will be.
That's right.
Hopefully, changing the weather in Florida before
That's
too
right.
long. So I mean, the world. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to crack a stupid joke. So go ahead.
That's the best part of these. Yeah, I do tend to look at the world through machine learning colored glasses, and which often comes down to GPUs. The machine learning applications just don't run fast enough without acceleration in most cases to be as useful as they should be. So some of what we are seeing in vSphere 8 is support for more PCIe devices. Up to 32 devices can be passed through. It's not likely that the majority of servers sold in the world will have 32 PCIe slots, but a lot of the devices that are hooked in will have virtual functions, and so that increases the number of devices seen by the operating system to above the number of physical slots. And even in conjunction with virtual functions, we want vSphere to stay ahead of what is physically available in the world. So being able to pass through 32 devices means that you can pass through a lot more GPUs than you would have before. Some of the devices, of course, will still be NICs and storage controllers and other things. But we will be well ahead of the curve for what systems are actually supplying to the machines. In addition to just passing through the devices and or virtual functions, NVIDIA offers a vGPU to slice up their GPUs. They can be time sliced with vGPU, and you can now pass up to 8 vGPUs to each individual VM. So that's good. And we are now supporting device groups. So if you have multiple physical GPUs attached to each other over NVLink, those can be recognized as grouped and linked appropriately by the VMs, which makes it easier for the applications to take care of multiple GPUs. In the machine learning world, we are seeing that models are scaling up. They just can't get enough memory. They can't get enough cores. And so a lot of them are taking advantage of multiple GPUs. We're supporting not only the physical world, we're supporting the actual applications that are running, especially during training. You just want access to as much hardware as possible, and you want those pieces of hardware to be able to talk to each other. So all of that is very good. The other way that you can use multiple GPUs is if they are sitting on different hosts, and you want the VMs to work with each other and to have their devices work with each other without going through the VMs. And that can be done if the GPUs and the NICs on the host are able to directly communicate. Then a lot of this interconnection, synchronization, communication can take place below the level of the application, below the level of the operating system, and just be device to device. So that scale out to multiple hosts is also supported. I'm going to put in one plug for BitFusion. BitFusion is a plugin. It is considered a feature of vSphere, but it is as a plugin, it's a little bit decoupled. So the main benefit to a BitFusion again comes back to being able to support more devices on a BitFusion server, and certainly there's been no pullback of support for BitFusion, and it should be able to take advantage of grouped GPUs as well.
So it sounds like we haven't reached the point where AI applications are satisfied with the resources they have. Yeah, we haven't quite reached that point yet. So about the device groups, I thought I heard that I guess one of the main benefits allows you to essentially allows devices or components like GPUs to communicate more, or I guess directly. Is that the case?
Yes.
So you can bypass the CPU and.
Yes, it's very similar to PCI to device to device, peer-to-peer PCI communication. NVLink is has less overhead and is direct. You're not going through a switch. But in terms of the technical appearance, it's quite similar. Just one less hop, and certainly not a hop into the software domain.
Okay. All right. So a number of new tools to kind of scale up your AI and ML systems. All right. Sounds good. Thank you, Jim. And let's move on to Mr. West. Michael.
Yes.
What from your perspective is really cool about vSphere 8?
Well, what's really exciting is that we continue to enhance the platform to support modern applications. And so the starting point for that in this release is we've upgraded to TKG 2.0. And for those of you who aren't familiar with TKG, that stands for Tanzu Kubernetes Grid. And this is essentially our implementation of an open source project called Cluster API. And the Cluster API project facilitates the automation of lifecycle of Kubernetes clusters. So if you wanted to submit a single YAML specification to an existing Kubernetes cluster, these custom resources and controllers would reconcile that into an actual Kubernetes cluster. So with TKG 2.0, one of the things that we've done is to unify into a single Kubernetes runtime across VMware. What you had seen in Vsphere 7 was that there were a couple of different options for customers if you were running on a public cloud or running on vSphere. You had a choice of runtimes that you might use. And so now we've unified this into a single Kubernetes runtime that, that you can run on whatever platform you choose to run this on. The other thing that we did was to provide new enhancements to TKG in terms of support for cluster class. And cluster class is part of this Cluster API open source project. And it's a declarative way to specify the definition of your cluster. And so it means that it's going to replace the existing TKC, if you're familiar with that in vSphere 7 with TKG. But the single declarative class is analogous to a VM class that you might be familiar with, where you could specify the amount of CPU and memory and storage that that you would associate with a VM that you were going to create. Now you can create a broader specification of your cluster that might do things like specify the overlay networking that you want to choose in there, whether it's Antria or Calico or something else. The cloud provider, so if you're running it on vSphere or you're running it on one of the public clouds, you're choosing that as part of the class, and then you simply reference that in your cluster spec to facilitate the deployment of that cluster. In addition to that, we've also added more capability or more choice around authentication mechanisms. In vSphere 7, the way that you authenticated to a cluster was to log into vSphere, and you got a token authenticated through vSphere single sign-on, and that was used to authenticate to the API of either your supervisor cluster or your TKG clusters. Now we've integrated another open source project called Pinniped that was sponsored by VMware. And this is an authentication service that allows you to integrate any external IDP using the OIDC transport for that communication. So then it means you could use GitLab or Okta or whatever other external IDP of your choice, as long as it supports OIDC. You can use that to manage your users and authenticate to your Kubernetes clusters. And quick plug, if you're interested in some details on that, I just published a blog at the tech zone core.vmware.com under the vSphere with Tanzu product. And you can see some details on how you set that up and use Pinniped with your TKG clusters and your supervisor cluster. You still have the ability to authenticate through vSphere in the same way that you did in vSphere 7, but this is additional capability for you. Some other things that we added for customers that are in air-gapped environments, we now support proxies for access to repos or registries that you use, and that was a much asked for feature that was missing previously. You'll also see us add support for auto scaling, and so that's really sizing your clusters based on the actual resource consumption that's going on in those clusters, and you'll see us sort of roll that out in the coming months. And then beyond the unified TKG or TKG 2.0, we've increased the availability or resiliency of the clusters that you deploy using a new concept called Vsphere Zones. And if you think about trying to isolate your physical infrastructure so that a failure doesn't take out all of your infrastructure, you might create a rack that has a set of servers with data stores associated with it and its own network segments. And you now associate that with a vSphere cluster, and you can specify a zone that is aligned with that vSphere cluster. And then both your TKG clusters and supervisor cluster, when you deploy them with highly available control plane, meaning you have multiple VMs, we actually create anti-affinity rules that will place those control plane VMs onto separate zones. So what that means for you is not only do you survive the outage of a VM, but you can survive the outage of a data store or even set of hosts or an entire rack, and your clusters will still remain available using these vSphere zones. So I encourage you to take a look at that. And then finally, you may be familiar if you've used the VM service in the past. We have the ability for you to bring your own image or define the boot image for the VM that you're creating and customize it in the way that you want. But you really couldn't do that with your TKG clusters prior to vSphere 8. And so now you have the ability to take the existing images that we have, either Photon OS or Ubuntu based, and make some configuration changes to them and save those images back into a content library. And then when you deploy the cluster, your clusters, you would use those new images as the base images. And you'll see us continue to iterate on bring your own image so that we can support more and more OSs with broader levels of configuration. So that's what's sort of top of mind around modern app enhancements in vSphere 8, Glenn.
Yeah, so it's it's going to be a lot easier to manage at a cluster level. Sounds like you're going to be able to use more more ways of authentication using more, I guess, open source methods. Better resilience at a broader level. Am I?
That's right.
Okay, and then the bring your own image. So yeah, lots going on, and I guess it's not necessarily just for vSphere admins, but maybe for DevOps folks, people are platform operators, people are maybe focused more on the Kubernetes environment, right?
That's right, and the thing to think about here is it all depends on the size of the organization. I mean, sometimes the vSphere admin gets called on to manage the clusters. There's not a dedicated DevOps team that's doing it, and so in that case, you want to use the tools that you know, and so you're able to facilitate the setup of a lot of this through vCenter, and then take advantage of vSphere constructs to provide a better experience for the developers that are actually consuming the cluster.
Okay. Yeah, it's a good point that Mike says, because that's what we're seeing a lot, that there's your VI admins and your developers, and there's a lot of skills missing in the middle, right, for DevOps, and I see it's great that especially with vSphere 8 that we're adding and making everything easier to consume those containers through Tanzu and allow the VI admins to not only present those to the developers, but also allow the developers to do self-service and consume those resources. So I think we're doing pretty well as far as presenting containers for both VI admins and developers and bridging that gap of knowledge.
Well, isn't it all? It's all about VMs and containers living together, like cats and dogs. So
it's really true. The modern application isn't just a couple of VMs in your sort of lamp stack that we used to see 10 years ago, where there might be 3 or 4 VMs that made up the whole app. Now you have sets of microservices that could be dozens, and they could be implemented potentially as a VM or as a set of containers generally running on Kubernetes now. And so the combination of the VM service and TKG lets you use the Kubernetes ecosystem of tools to lifecycle manage that entire app, whether it's a VM or a TKG cluster.
Awesome. Okay, thanks, Michael. And so I guess I want to mention or really kind of pivot a little and talk about Vsphere Plus. So if you, I'm not sure if you saw our announcement back in June, where we announced a new offering for vSphere called Vsphere Plus. You can kind of think of Vsphere Plus is kind of a new edition of Vsphere Plus, although we don't call it an edition. There's software as a service or SaaS elements that are part of it. It's you can think of it as vSphere, sort of hybrid cloud vSphere. It's a lot of the traditional capabilities of vSphere in its fullest edition, Enterprise Plus, with some additional cloud services and a cloud console where you can manage everything. And I wanted to ask Dave, since this is an area, Dave, that you cover, specific to vSphere Plus, what are some of maybe some exciting things in vSphere 8?
So yeah, Vsphere Plus has been, we got a lot of traction, I would say, a lot of interest from customers on what Vsphere Plus is. And, we saw a few years back that we're starting to move to the public cloud, and some customers, some companies jumped on it and right away. And they were saying, hey, I love the benefits and I like what they're doing, but sometimes for some of my applications, it's not cost effective. So we had to move them back, or maybe we need better performance, etc. We have to move them back. So we're seeing that both private clouds and public clouds are growing at different rates, but they're both growing. And what we're trying to do with Vsphere Plus is bringing those cloud benefits down to the on-prem environments. So we know on-prem is not going anywhere, right? But we also know that customers are asking for those benefits. Hey, I want to be able to scale when I need to be able to do different things, just like I do in the public cloud. And Vsphere Plus is allowing us to do that by connecting the on-prem environments to the cloud and bringing those services and benefits down to those environments, right? Not only that, but as we're adding vCenters to the cloud environment. So it's just a cloud console that we connect through a gateway. So we're not sending username and passwords. We're not connecting directly a vCenter to the internet, right? We don't want to do that. Security conscious person. But by doing that, we are presenting and we're showing all the vCenter features, some of the inventory, for example, on some of the operations events of not only a few vCenters, but we can go to thousands of vCenters on one.
Thousands.
Thousands, yeah, of on one centralized location, right? Cloud console. So think of it as enhanced link mode without the limitations, right? In enhanced link mode, we can go to 15, and there's some limitations as to same SSO, etc. So all that goes away, and you can connect many thousands of vCenters to that cloud. See inventory of all your vCenters, versions, licensing. We can also see events for the entire infrastructure, right? For the global infrastructure, what is happening, security posture. So on the back end, we're using Carbon Black to present and show you what is happening as far as security goes. Hey, these are your top 10, top 5 security events. You may want to go back to this vCenter and disable SSH because it's wide open. We're using Log Insight to collect all those logs and show you, hey, we have 50,000 events over the weekend. Nobody was working. There was no backups. There's something going on there. So we're presenting that to our customers from one central location. In addition, we can have configurations. So think of host profiles for vCenters. So we can take one vCenter as a source of truth and say, this is what I want all my vCenters to look like, all those settings for the configuration, and apply it as a profile to different vCenters. You could do it by country, by city, by state. And then we show you, hey, what is the difference between all the configurations between the vCenters, etc. So there's a lot of features from the cloud that we can bring on-prem, and it gives the customers not just a vCenter per vCenter view, but also it's a higher level view of your entire global inventory.
So with vSphere 8, it introduces some new capabilities to vSphere Plus. right?
Yes, and that's what I was getting. So Vsphere 8, the next part is seeing a global inventory of VMs. Vsphere 8 adds these add-on services that they're very powerful. So I already said how we're using some of our own products already on the back end. We're not charging you extra for logins, and we're not charging you for Carbon Black. But this add-on services is a step forward. It's a step to add additional services like Visualize Operations Cloud, where you can not only see what is happening on the operation side, but you can dig deeper into capacity management. When are you going to run out of all your entire capacity on the storage side, etc.
Well, that's handy.
Also,
So if I've got 1,000 vCenters, it's probably hard to keep track of where am I running out of resources.
yes,
Here I could
yeah,
actually see everything, see which vCenter needs attention
yeah,
first. Yeah.
that's a great point. If you have thousands of vCenters, how you have to go vCenter by vCenter. Hey, how many data stores do I have? How many are getting full? How much storage do I have left for the year? Or I'm renewing a contract, or I need to buy more hardware. How much do I need? How much are we growing? So it gives you that overview at a high level of what is happening everywhere. We also have another add-on services, which is VMware Cloud Disaster Recovery, right? And that is something that we can't really ignore now, especially nowadays with ransomware, disaster recovery, right? I
Hurricanes.
Yeah.
went through a hurricane last night, right? So luckily I still have power, but just imagine some of our customers down south for me, they probably, underwater, or they had to do a
Yeah.
DR scenario. So having that, not only the visibility of your global VMs, but easily going and pick, hey, I'm going to pick 15 VMs from this site. And just by clicking protect VM, now those on-prem VMs are being backed up to the cloud, right? And then if I need to flip it, I can, a hurricane went by, I lost my on-prem, and now I can just spin up those VMs on the cloud, and my business can continue to run. And we're bringing this together with VCDR, right? Making it super easy for our
Now,
customers to do that.
now we've had VCDR, but I guess with this, what we're actually in addition bringing some workflow integration, right? With vSphere
Yes,
Plus.
exactly. So with vSphere Plus, we're using our own, VMware Cloud portal, right? And just like vSphere Plus and VCDR, we're sharing the same portal. So we're just switching between services. You procure, your account has those services available to you. So you may have VMC on AWS, vSphere Plus, VCDR, Visualize Operations Cloud, and all those are just services that are part of your profile, part of your account, part of your organization that you can leverage, and everything's coming together. So even though you have on-prem environments, you're bringing those cloud services to your on-prem environments through Vsphere Plus. So it's bringing everything back together, right? From being dispersed to going to different clouds, going to different services. We're bringing everything together, making it easier, just like we talked about earlier, of making things easier for our customers.
Okay.
And speaking of that, Mike was talking about modern apps. And another new thing for vSphere 8 is Cloud Consumption Interface, CCI. And we're making Tanzu, the consumption of containers, super easy for customers with vSphere Plus. So vSphere Plus is going to include CCI as part of it, right? There's no additional entitlement, no additional charge for that. And it's going to allow our customers to select a vCenter, for example, and say, okay, enable developer experience. And that is going to go out to your on-prem and configure your environment for Tanzu, for TKG, for Tanzu Kubernetes. Not only that, it's going to go out and configure it, but also it's going to allow you to, from a UI console, from this same cloud-based console, to configure that environment, create namespaces, add permissions, who needs access to what, make your resource pools. So create a pool for your developers. Hey, Jim Brogan can only use 10 terabytes because he's a storage hog, so we're gonna keep it small.
That's
Yeah, he likes to play a lot of games, so we're gonna keep it tight. And you can create that, and it's that part of the VI admin. It's just making it super easy to configure. But then on the other side, the developers can come to this same interface, the Cloud Console, and they can just start consuming those resources that have been already configured. So if James is wants to create a new application or a new, he's playing Tetris or something like that, and he wants to deploy it on a different server, we're going to say, hey, no, you can't do that, or you only have, this much storage, or you don't have permissions to these other resources. I know he likes GPU, so we're going to block him for that, right? So we can do that, and the developers only have access to certain resources, and they can just self-service themselves and take what they need, right? So again, we're making this super easy from all aspects.
So it sounds like cloud consumption interface is something that's more. It's not just for vSphere admins. And you mentioned developer experience. So maybe I guess it's something that developers, DevOps, platform ops, other folks can use to provision services wherever.
Yeah, exactly. And again, so right now, if people are familiar with containers, it's a learning curve, right? When I started, it was all CLI. It's not as easy. It's non-trivial to get started with, but with CCI, so UI based. So if you're not familiar with the CI piece, not only configure that, but be able to generate those YAML files automatically for you. So if you're using VM servers, like Michael said, you can select your OS, and as you select different options within CCI, it's going to start building that YAML file for you, and you can export it and reuse it, or share it with other developers, so they can use the same profile, the same file, to create the same pool of resources.
It sounds like maybe, correct me if I'm wrong, but as a developer or DevOps folks, I don't have to, I don't, it's the infrastructure world is maybe more abstracted, and I don't have to focus as much on
exactly.
those details.
Yeah, so for the developer, is like they're going to any cloud, right? But again, these are resources on-prem. So for those customers that don't want to go to the public cloud, or they want to stay on-prem, which I understand, we can still present this as a cloud, service for the developers. They go sole service and consume those on-prem resources when they need to, in a cloud, public cloud manner base almost.
Yeah, the paradigm's very different from what they're probably used to if they have to interact with vCenter or with the vSphere admin to get resources. They don't have to go ask for that. They simply go in and they select a region, and there's resources that have been assigned that they can consume through a project in similar way if they are familiar with using public cloud models.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, just think about it. Just having developers go and opening a ticket. Hey, I need this tomorrow, and the admin's gonna say, "No, I'm busy. I have to do an upgrade today." And, right? It would take forever.
Yeah.
So that alleviates both ends and just make it really easy to get things going, and it benefits the customer and the business.
Okay, great. Anything else from a vSphere Plus standpoint that you think is going to be looked forward to?
Vsphere Plus. We have a lot of things coming up, but I can't really talk about it. It's top secret.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's right. Well, a lot of people ask about, and I promise not to bring up roadmap stuff, but maybe I'll cheat a little. But a lot of people talk about, well, with vSphere Plus, it's a lot easier to lifecycle my vCenters. But everyone asks, well, what about the ESXi hosts? And I guess, we could say there's a lot of work going on. I don't know if, how much we'd want to say, but it's definitely an area of it's something everyone asks about, and we want to provide anything you want to say on that, or plead the fifth.
I would just say that I didn't say what you said. Vcenter upgrades are really, really easy. So it's just like when you're upgrading your phone, you get a notification saying, "Hey, there's vSphere 8 is out. Would you like to upgrade?" Right? So we have vCenters on-prem connected to vSphere Plus. We get the notification. You hit a button to do a pre-check, and then it says, "Okay, everything looks good. There's no, there's little chances that something will break. We like to upgrade," and you say yes to click on the button, and then it goes out and does everything for you, which is a migration-based upgrade. But we're leveraging different features on the back end, so we're not shutting down the services from the source vCenter. So vCenters keep running. We build a new one a while, everything's still working. Copy databases, copy permissions, whatever we need to do. And the only downtime is when we flip services We shut down the services from the source, change IP addresses, change MAC addresses, and then bring services up. So we're taking downtime from hours to minutes when we're doing vCenter upgrades. And it's just,
Yeah,
if something
that's
else
huge.
happens, something bad happens, guess what? You have your source vCenter available, power on, just, change IP addresses and MAC addresses, you're back in business. So making it super easy. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. All right, so let me kind of then open it up to the group. Any other interesting enhancements that people are going to want to know about for in vSphere 8?
Yeah, I have one, Glenn. It's not as cutting edge as modern apps or DPUs or even GPUs, but it is in the area that I think a lot of people take for granted, and that's vMotion. vMotion isn't anything new, but we're continuously making updates to it. And there's essentially three major updates that we're bringing in vSphere 8 with regards to vMotion, and it's all designed around adding more interoperability between vMotion and those certain workloads that sometimes don't play well with it. So there are certain workloads where you do a vMotion, there's a very brief stun that 99% of applications don't even notice. But for that 1% of applications, they can sometimes trigger some issues because they're very time sensitive, or they could be voice over IP applications or clustered applications. So the first thing we're bringing is what we call vMotion notifications. This allows the vSphere layer to essentially pre-warn an application that, hey, a vMotion event has been triggered. You now have 60 seconds, 90 seconds, whatever limit that can be defined by the administrator to perform some work to prepare yourself for this coming vMotion so that the application doesn't fail, or maybe it needs to quiesce the file system or do a controlled failover. So it allows the applications to be pre-warned about a vMotion. The vMotion will continue as normal once the acknowledgement is received, and the application continues working away as normal. Now, this does require some custom applications to be defined. So it's not an out-of-the-box feature. You do have to either integrate your application into the VMware Tools APIs or write like a small additional listener application that intercepts the notifications. But it's really going to help those niche use cases, applications. Some applications in the telco space as well are going to benefit from this as well. The other thing in the area of vMotion is for transferring large amounts of data. Doing a live vMotion of just a couple of gigs, and if you're not changing data store, it's pretty instantaneous, right? But if you're doing a vMotion and you're also changing data store location, and you've got cold data, and that could be either a powered off VM or a VM with snapshots, the data path is over NFC today, which is extremely slow nowadays. It caps out at, I think, about 1.3 gigabits per second. But with in vSphere 8, we can now enable us to use the vMotion protocol to do that cold data transfer, which allows us to unlock the full potential and the full data speeds that vMotion allows, I think up to theoretical 80 gigabits per second. But even in my own lab, I don't have the best hardware. I saw a 5x increase in the speed of doing even something as small as like a 100 gig VM disk. So it's definitely powerful, and it'll definitely benefit those kind of cold data migration things. Mm-hmm. And I said there was three things. Yeah, the third thing is kind of hooks into some of the areas in the AI ML space that Jim spoke about. Because when you're passing through hardware devices like that, you do lose the mobility of the VM because it's almost tethered to the physical hardware. Now, the vGPU space that NVIDIA works in helps with that as well. But if you're doing a full PCI pass-through, you're tethering that VM to physical hardware. So we're introducing a new API and framework for vendors to create new virtual hardware-backed devices. And we call this device virtualization extensions. And essentially, we get a new device driver from the hardware vendor that goes on the ESXi host. They'll also have to deliver a device driver for the virtual machine, for the virtual hardware component. But with those in place, the VM will be able to live vMotion, suspend, resume, snapshot, like any other regular VM, even though it's still using physical hardware under the hood. So as long as the destination host has the same hardware, the VM can freely vMotion transparently to the virtual machine. So that's going to be really cool to look out for in the future for vendors to come out with these new hardware-backed virtual devices going forward.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, Phelim, and thank you, team. We've pretty much run out of time here, so I want to just again remind everyone that this is just obviously a quick grand tour of what's new in vSphere 8. But to get more information on these topics, please make sure to join our VMUG webcasts, which will be starting on October 5th and continuing on October 6th, October 13th, and November 1st. You can go to the VMUG site to register for those webcasts. And if we can add a link to this after the fact, we will. And a couple other notes. While we did announce vSphere 8 on August 30th, the product's not available yet. It will be available in October. And I can't be more specific than that, but just watch for the release, the formal release of vSphere 8 in October. And also just a quick reminder that if you're running vSphere 6, 6.5, 6.7, our end of support will occur on October 15th. So probably bad to end an event like this on bad news, but it is what it is. So, but again, thanks team, thanks everyone for joining us today, and look forward to interacting with all of you in future events down the road. Take care and have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.